This is John Mena. I'm with CDW. I'm actually with part of CDW that is the ServiceNow Solutions practice, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But wanted to welcome you to this event. And for some of you, you've been through a number of our sessions with us, so welcome back. Just as a recap, though, this is really the fourth in our series. We've been doing them roughly every month. We've done other topics, including CMDB, in terms of the challenges and how to get more out of ServiceNow, leveraging the CMDB. We did one on our top favorite things with Quebec when Quebec was released, and more recently we've done some things around IT business management. But today I'm real excited about the topic that we're going to be talking about here, because quite frankly, while it's related to IT, and you'll see lots of crossovers in the challenges that we have just in terms of the workplace models that we're all faced with and challenged with today, and quite frankly, they're changing almost every day. The good news here is there's a lot of process and people part of the discussion that we'll talk a little bit about as well. And then we'll also talk about how we can leverage technology to really start to transform our ability to handle these varying workplace models. So on that note, a little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to our speakers today. We welcome questions, and if you can, please put your questions in the Q&A section of the meeting tool. So if you put a question in there, we'll be looking at those as the speakers are presenting, and if it fits, we might throw those questions in during the session, but certainly towards the end, we might have some time to go through any of the questions that we might not have covered during the actual session itself. So on that note, real excited about the team we've got today presenting. Molly Rogers and Carol Hayes, we're talking about folks that are specialists not only in the HR and facility side of the house and helping organizations with managing the workplace. They've got some strong knowledge around the ServiceNow side of things. And what you'll see today is the content that we're going to be sharing is very product agnostic, right? You'll see theories and ideas and best practices. And yes, if many of the examples you'll see will have ServiceNow screenshots up. And if you have ServiceNow and you actually have this part of the platform, it certainly can be easier to roll out some of those changes or help manage the new workflows and the new ways of working. But again, as the other sessions have been, this content is educational. This is not a sales session. And thank you for attending. Looking forward to turn it over to Molly and Carol. And I think Molly will kick things off for us. So Molly, welcome.
Great. Well, hi and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's session. And like John said, we are focusing on a discussion around the new ways of working and the new workplace of the future. And so we've got an action-packed agenda today. We are going to talk a bit about some of the challenges that have emerged over the last 18 months and how do we address those challenges in managing a safe workplace. Also, how do we optimize HR efficiency during this time? How do we work with organizations to lead and continue to evolve our leadership models within the workplace, including this hybrid model? And then finally, we're going to get into a discussion about things around continual improvement as we head into this new environment. So to set the context, I just want to pass this over to Carol to talk to us a bit about some of our recent headlines. So Carol.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon or late morning, if wherever you may be. So look at these headlines. These are the headlines that have been pulled actually in just the past 6 weeks. Never before have we experienced such guidance about a potential return to work situation. I can't remember in my 25 plus year career in HR where the government or the CDC has stepped forward and said, hey, this is how you all should be mandating or considering your return to work options. And how we've engaged our employees or the workforce over the last 19 months plus is really changed as well. Communication has had to be ramped up, and the CDC and the government has certainly given lots of employers direction about how you should be communicating to your employees, what you should be mandating them to do, as well as really just engaging them. For some industries, they've received so much direction about when your employees return to work, or they've not even been able to be out of the workplace. They've really given direction about this is how employees should report to work. This is the day-to-day guidance in which they've done it, as well as how it continues to evolve and change has just been unbelievable. In the last 19 months, I mean, I think it's changed pretty much daily. In some states, in some industries, it's changed dramatically as well. So next slide, actually, you could see that the workplace of the past was primarily in the office. Pretty much every employee or every work member was sitting there, and you knew you could walk by their desk and chat with them. The workplace of today, and really this changed in a matter of 3 months or so, everyone was at home, or the majority of industries, everyone was at home. And the workplace of the future, you know, I still think it's to be determined. It's definitely a hybrid environment. Some industries, it's been so curious to say, nope, not coming back at all. We really don't want to be in an office. We really have enjoyed this workplace, working from home. We've gotten very productive, whereas other organizations have had to flex and say, well, maybe we're not really sure what the hybrid workplace will be. So next slide, please. The pandemic, this may be your first pandemic. I know it's certainly my first pandemic, but it's probably not the first crisis that your organization has encountered. So how have you communicated with your workforce? Probably you've relied first on what your values have been. What are your principles? What are the communication tools in which you were using, and how were they enhanced? Never more critical has IT and HR been linked than probably in the last 19 months. IT, HR, and even facilities, changing that environment and changing that engagement has just ramped up tremendously. One of the most curious things is those organizations that said, nope, we are a heavy paper-oriented organization. We will always have our employees come in and, you know, their first day, they'll be filling out forms and we'll be, you know, they've got to be in the office. In a matter of 3 months or so, or a matter of almost weeks, those organizations said, wow, I think we need to rethink this. And getting the laptops just home to employees' work there to get them to work was critical. So if your organization has not seen this marriage, deep marriage between IT and HR, wow, I'd love to chat with you because I think that would be just a really great case study. But I know everything that we do is so quickly tied to IT and HR. So going forward, though, it's really going to be curious to see how we continue to evolve the organization and how those communications will differ and how will we develop and assess our employees. And our workforce is just going to be so critical. So Molly, how do you think, I'm going to toss it over to you, how do you think that the organization is going to continue to evolve over the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, I think having, being very nimble in that partnership with IT and HR is so incredibly important. And it's important that, just like how you were sharing the headlines at the front of this call, that we're continually monitoring what is happening in this environment and making changes based off of that. And I'm curious, I believe Latanya, our host, put up a poll at the top of the call to say, you know, what kind of work environment are you all in? And John, can you share with us what those poll results are?
Yeah, Molly, so a couple things. I don't know if the poll actually launched, so we'll check back
Sure.
here and that may go up. But I have a comment and a thought, something that I observed,
Great.
Here. So here at CDW, right, because of the nature of what we do for a living, we've got visibility to so many different things in the organization, not just IT. And what I noticed right when the pandemic hit in early 2020, CDW really mobilized for its customers. Initially on the hardware side, right, all of a sudden we had organizations, clients of ours, some of them public sector, some of them private, that had to now prepare for thousands of people to work from home almost instantly. And we mobilized on the hardware side, and we were best friends with IT for doing that, and we helped deploy all this equipment and the connectivity in many cases, and also the access to applications. Again, so go from maybe 10, 15% of the workforce for an organization was working from home to 98%, and making that happen in a matter of a week or two. What was interesting, right, 6 months in to that, we saw it change. Everybody was working from home, and we had helped them through that crisis, so to speak. But now it was all about productivity. It was all about, and it started to shift more back towards HR, right? Because there were some people that still had to go into the office for certain things. There were some people that still had to visit a client site for certain things. All of a sudden, the best practices around rules. And what about employees that weren't comfortable with going in or doing this when other employees were okay? So all of a sudden, IT realizes, wait a minute, this is bigger than technology, right? And that's where those bridges started to really get built that you guys are talking about, where these different parts of the business probably work together more strategically than they had ever worked together before. And those bridges are still there. The question now is, what's that new normal look like? And some of this is going to be here to stay for the good, meaning we'll be more hybrid and there will be additional productivity for those things. But just from my seat, it was interesting seeing that move.
Yeah, John, thank you for that. That's exactly right. And to the point that you made, at first there was just the stabilization of, oh my goodness, how do we respond? And now there's that shift to, in addition to that stabilization, how do we partner up with HR and some of the other areas and functions to move the organization forward? And really what you're talking about is that process of going from solving the immediate crisis to evolving the organization. And in many cases, organizations are still in solve mode because it has been a challenge to try to solve some of these big issues at scale. And so right here on screen, you'll see some examples of, on the solve side of the house, how do we really ensure for the evolving health and safety of our employees, and how do you do that at scale? And so on this diagram here, you'll see, number one, gaining that employee readiness information and employee sentiment, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. Then how do you prepare that workplace for whatever model it is that you all are choosing? So we're seeing that the hybrid model is a model in some organizations and some industries, but there are plenty of industries and organizations where the employee is very proximate to the customer and there is not an option to work from home. Well, there's still things that the organization needs to do in order to follow all the different guidelines and protocols and so on. And how do you do that at scale and instantaneously? In addition, how do you monitor what is happening with your employees and measuring the employee experience throughout throughout the whole thing. So a couple of examples that we wanted to share with the team today is with this persistence of the infection, organizations are really requesting and monitoring the health and safety status of their employees. And this is a challenge that many organizations are facing. These happen to be ServiceNow screenshots. This is one way that you can utilize technology. But monitoring that health situation of your employees is something that many organizations are doing, and in the middle of the screen you'll see the prevalence of using your mobile phone and really helping the employees provide those check-ins or health assessments or whatever it is that your organization has decided you're going to follow, and making it really, really easy for those employees in the palm of their hand. Another challenge that we've seen emerge over the last 19 months is, what do you do when you have an employee who tests positive? And there is responses and policies and procedures all across the continuum of how organizations have selected to respond to that. Oh, and it looks, did we lose my screen sharing here?
I think we did.
We did.
Yep.
Well, while you pull that up, actually, we might have actually lost Molly entirely, but one thing in particular, as Molly mentioned with contact tracing and monitoring, some employees might not feel comfortable sharing their status. You know, if you're reporting into HR, sometimes some employees feel, whoa, wait a minute, that's getting too deep into, you know, the true medical information. So the nice ability, we might have lost Molly entirely, so if someone else can share the screen for me,
I've got it.
Jump right on in where we lost her.
Yeah, if I just can get rights to share the screen, that'd be great. I'll pull that up and we'll talk a little bit more about the contract tracing and monitoring.
Sure.
Carol, I know one of the things, right, that we're seeing a lot from our clients is everybody, what you usually don't have, you usually have policies and they're very set. Now what we're learning is that it's very different from person to person, right, in terms of comfort level. So, you know, having rules that are flexible are certainly going to be key.
Absolutely. And one thing with contact tracing too is that you've got to make sure that we're flexible. Every time we do something is, well, wait a minute, if we're building something in 6 months, are we going to have to change it? And how can we wrap that back and change it? You know, I've definitely heard a lot about organizations that have said, nope, this is our policy, this is what we're going to do, we're going to definitely approach it this way. And then they've said, wait a minute. Once they started to get a lot of heat from their employees, they said, well, let's rethink this. So in addition to that, changing policies, but pivoting to workplace flexibility of, well, where can employees sit and where can your workforce move in? If you have an area of your organization where a lot of individuals have been contracting something and you need to quarantine that area or you need to do deep cleaning in that area, how do you move them? So having tools that employees can choose where they sit for a day based on various issues, having that ability to scale this operation is just so critical.
Yeah, and Carol, I remember talking to one of our clients, actually a mayor of a major metropolitan area, had talked about changing the workplace models. It was already happening in a sense, but the pandemic just put it on light speed. And I think that really became the point. How do we enable ourselves to pivot to a model where we're always going to be ready? And that does include employees being asked to check in, checking out of space, right? Reservation management, so much more. And these are not things that will go away, because what we're also seeing with the workplace, especially the younger workforce, they're not readily going to come back to a 40-hour work week in the office. Things have changed. So when you're recruiting, retaining even more seasoned employees, the flexibility has to be there for most organizations. With that comes, right, the ability to manage, the capacity, the in, the out, even without the threat of a pandemic or a viral situation. We still have to now manage for that kind of hybrid space.
Yep. Looks like Molly is back. Welcome, Molly. Why don't you pick up on the next slide, which is the vaccine slide?
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. And sorry about that technical difficulty. Like we have said throughout this session today, there has just been a lot of changes that the organizations have had to address. And so one of the key challenges that our clients are really facing is around vaccines and vaccine management. And so like our headline showed at the top of the call, there are policies and procedures all over the continuum, once again, related to vaccines. Long story short, many organizations needed to have an easy way to gather information related to vaccines. In many cases, many organizations have chosen to do optional self-reporting and as simple as using an online form to gather that information and to monitor that. On the other end of the continuum, there are organizations that are requiring their employees to have vaccines. Well, what that does then is it kicks off a need to have the organization help that employee actually get their vaccine, and vaccine administration management becomes very, very important to manage. And so those are a few additional things. Also, with everything that has happened over the last 19 months, we have seen within the HR space an unprecedented level of employees requesting reasonable accommodations, from workplace accommodations because now they don't have a dedicated desk and they need some special ergonomic accommodations, to adjusted remote work schedules, to accommodations related to the vaccine requirements. We have never seen this level of reasonable accommodation requests ever within the HR space. And so how do we use technology in a way to be able to efficiently and effectively manage those requests? And we're able to do that with our workflows and what have you. We've also seen, as a result of everything, some elevated needs around complaints and litigation. And once again, how do we use workflows to manage that volume and gather that information?
As well as some of those accommodation requests that have been coming in, how do you manage those accommodations to make sure that you're consistent across the board and making sure that the right documentation is in? So employee sentiment is just absolutely critical. You've got to really make sure that, I think there's some slides. Yep, there's some additional information coming up there. Really making sure, again, like we've mentioned, that we're agile, that a policy or a new situation that you've created today is something that can change tomorrow. Also making sure that you're updating your communications and that you're keeping people informed rapidly as well as logically. And when I say logically, is that, one day you're not saying this is our policy and then the next day we're changing it and there's no rationale or no backstory around that. And I think that's one of the most important things for employees. As we've heard so much, employees who can go to another employer because they are handling a communication right or the perception of right, keeping employees in your organization is just so critical right now. And there's so many great ways that you can keep your employees engaged and keeping them up to date on the latest and greatest. One thing that ServiceNow actually has is these employee readiness surveys. Something that, maybe 2 years ago, we HR teams used to spend inordinate amounts of time doing check-ins and pulse surveys and, annual surveys. With the way things are changing today, we don't have the luxury of time to say, okay, well, we're going to do a survey today and we're going to get those answers back to you in 6 months from now once we've kind of collated the data. Right now, we've got to be very rapid in getting those surveys drafted as well as rolled out and giving people feedback. Readiness surveys, pulse surveys are kind of the most critical thing that I think you could be doing. Those surveys really let you create a at the moment survey, and you can get really great information and feedback. How are employees feeling right now? Really great way to segment it based on, we've got one population that we need to pull a little bit more than another population, maybe with a policy that got changed. The types of survey readiness tools really allow you that ability to segment that. Knowledge article trending. Oh, John, were you going to say something? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, on those two right there, Carol, I was going to say it's an interesting thing, right? The surveys are going to give you great data so that you can actually leverage that data for some decisions, right? But just the fact that you're sending out these surveys, right? Just the fact that you've got new knowledge articles available, it does a lot just in itself, right? Because from an employee satisfaction perspective, a lot of it often is the employee feeling that the organization cares. And by taking the time to ask them, to pull the surveys out there, get them out there, there's a sense automatically that leadership at the organization is on this, right? And they care, and they're tapping into the employees and the coworkers for that information. So I guess my point is, whether you use ServiceNow for the surveys or you use SurveyMonkey or whatever it is you use for surveys, just the fact that you're proactive and asking everyone, how do you feel, will generally bring the satisfaction level and bring down the anxiety of the coworkers who are also dealing with lots of changes in their lives.
Yeah, great point. I think in addition to that too is, what types of questions are your employees maybe not asking? Sometimes an employee might fear, whoa, wait a minute, if this policy gets changed, what are some of the impacts to me? So knowledge article trending, case trends. For those employees that are asking questions, what are the greatest number of questions that are coming into your service center or your call center environments? Those are really great ways to figure out, what are employees asking, what aren't they asking, and maybe what should we prepare for? I love there's so many great organizations out there, but Gartner and some of those strong organizations like that just give us so many salient things. Don't always look for the employee that's speaking, but look for the employee that's maybe your passive employee. Well, they tell you a lot of great information as well. So these are great ways to target that type of thing. You've got great forums. Oops, that's okay. Great forums as well as campaigns. So communication and feedback is just critical. We've got, this is a picture of a ServiceNow landing page, your employee portals, and your mobile apps, if you hopefully have those as well. That should really be your portal of knowledge for your employees. If perhaps you've not used your employee portal for information and you really just used it for, come here if you need information, continuing to evolve that over the next 3 to 6 months will be absolutely critical. Unfortunately, employees are going to look for information that's written and not written. So if you've got the ability to push out messages that you think are critical at a point in time, using your employee portal or your employee apps to do so is just so important. Next slide, actually. So the changes in the workplace, as I've already mentioned, the way we were before is not the way we are today, and it surely will not be the way that we are in the future. So Molly, I'm going to look to you. How can you talk to us a little bit of how the leadership models are going to change over the next 3, 6, 12 months, as if we're even able to go that far?
Sure, sure. So like we said at the top of the call, as we think about where we are today, 19 months into this thing, we have to really think about how do we shift from solving those initial crises to evolving to the new workplace, however you define that for your organization and your new normal for that organization. Well, as we do this has been a tremendous amount of change that has been thrust upon not only the employees, not only our customers, but also our managers and leaders. And so there's been a lot of research that has gone on in this space about how to evolve and ensure as an HR organization we're helping our leaders and our managers manage that change and evolve the way that they lead. And so the next 3 slides are referencing some research that Gartner has made around hybrid leadership. Even if your organization isn't going into a hybrid model, but just a changed model, I think this information is really relevant still. What they found in the research at Gartner is that just having the right mindset is not sufficient enough for success within this new world. You need to have that mindset paired with skill set and ensuring that as HR organizations, we're really leveraging our strategy and learning organizations and coaching organizations to help those managers boost up that skill set and also reinforce the mindset for success. And so if we can go into this next page, great, thank you. There are a number of different skills that are really, really important for managers to boost as they head into the future and managing in this future way. So what does performance management look like in this new world and these new models that have been implemented? And how do we enable development? So the way that we developed employees 2 years ago is very different than how we enable that development today. What does that look like and how is it defined? And as a leader, how are you reinforcing that? Of course, what Carol has already shared with us around communication and communicating effectively, and then also enabling that enterprise contribution is absolutely important. The communicating effectively piece is something that Carol and I and John and many others are seeing become so incredibly important. And in the screenshot of the employee portal that Carol showed just a few minutes ago, you saw an example of a campaign that was run specifically targeted to managers to give managers right at the point of time some information, some tips, some tools around communication. Then in addition to that, in this new space, we need our managers and our leaders to think about how do we foster inclusive team cultures. So if you're all remote or partially remote or all in person, what does that team culture feel like and how do you approach that inclusively? And all along the way, building out that trust and psychological safety and team norms. So I'd be curious we're going to put up a poll here, and I'd love to hear from this team around which leadership skills you're finding are most important to evolving your organization. So in the Q&A section or the polling section of the tool, you're going to see a poll. Go ahead and give us your answer. And we're going to take a minute or two and see what the team has to say.
It's funny, Molly, as you were talking about some of these things, I really thought a lot about fostering inclusive team climate. There are definitely going to be teams where you've got 100% of your people at home and or 50-50, 60-40. It's going to really vary, and making sure those that are at home or those are at work or the blended groups really have some cohesiveness, and not making one group feel less included than another is just going to be one of those really tough things, especially as we evolve going forward and maybe even change daily. So I'll be curious to see how that one plays out.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we just got the poll result in from the folks, and it sounds to me like communicating effectively is one of the most important skills that leadership needs to evolve, and that communication piece really sets the tone and sets the stage for that success and for creating all these other things. We've got to make sure we are communicating effectively. So as we think about just everything that has happened in the last 19 months and the pressure on leaders to communicate and the pressure on managers to really manage a lot of this new environment and whatever the new normal is for your organization, how do we do that at scale, effectively and efficiently? And we are seeing the emergence of a lot of great ways that organizations are moving that forward. One example are the Journey Accelerator plans that are available within ServiceNow. These are plans that HR professionals can work with managers to really define out what that plan is for a particular team, department, or business within your organization. And within that plan, you define out, okay, what do managers need to do? What do mentors need to do? What do individual employees need to do? What are key messages? What might be some training classes that individuals would take, and so on? And how do you pace those experiences and tasks for all the people who surround that employee, not just the manager, but also the mentor and others? How do you pace all those tasks, monitor it, and organize it in a way that's really supportive to that employee's experience and also the organization's goals? And so if we jump to the next slide, you'll see with our Journey Accelerator, you just really define out the hybrid workplace transition as an example of a journey. There can be other journeys if you're not moving to a hybrid model, and then you can define out and use workflows to move not only the employee but also the manager and the mentor and any other key contributors through the different weeks and the different tasks of the journey, all in a very automated way. And so I want to pause there and check in to see, we've talked about a tremendous amount today, and I want to check in to see what kind of Q&A we're seeing, or John, any other items that are coming in via the chat.
Sure. Happy to put a couple of questions up there for the group that have come in. So one of them is, can you share a little bit about, in general, how this and everything we've talked about today plays in with HIPAA? So, we've got organizations that we're involving where people want information, they want to know things. where does HIPAA stand with all of this? And, how challenging is it to maintain compliance with that? And I'll give you a personal experience, because I've wondered as well. I hear about a coworker, right, that has COVID, and of course, your heart goes out to them. First thing you think about is, were they vaccinated, right? And now that's a whole nother topic. Normally with HIPAA, we never talk about anybody's health conditions, but all of a sudden with COVID, it seems commonplace to say Joe has COVID or Mike had COVID or Sally was or was not vaccinated. Any thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, and I can respond to that first, and then Carol, if you want to chime in, that would be great. So first and foremost, every organization needs to work with their legal and compliance department to define out what your policies and procedures are and how to handle that. With that being said, we've seen a lot of organizations utilize ServiceNow HR for various related tasks, accommodation requests, and so on, because built in within that is some important domain separation, and only HIPAA trained HR professionals are dealing with some of those requests. We also have some functionality within the Safe Workplace application as well that can ensure that we only have the appropriate authorized folks working on these cases and contact tracing and so on. That's just really the nuts and bolts technology piece. More broadly, organizations need to define out what their rules of the road are and get those published and get the leadership and all of the communications aligned to that as well. And so I think in practice you do, John, hear people saying, oh gosh, so-and-so's got COVID. Well, unless there is certain procedures that have been followed where there is a consent given to the organization or to a manager to say to the rest of the team, Joe's got COVID, really they are putting the organization at risk.
Yeah.
And so it is incredibly important. To
yep.
look into that.
And I do think in the Safe Workplace apps with ServiceNow, there are definitely ways to have force everybody to do a check-in on the topic, check boxes, is yes okay, why okay, so we can at least start that process. And I think what I've learned and heard is it's most important to treat everyone equally. So whatever is being done, right, if the policies are in place, that's a huge step as well.
Yeah, and I think consistency is key. So it might not always be perceived as equal. So I may see, well, that you should tell me that Susie has COVID. Well, is it consistent? Is there a business need to know? Is your policy consistent with your policy? We've changed so much over the last 19 months in that, well, if we put it under the banner of COVID, well, I can talk about it because we're all talking about COVID. Well, is that right? Is that legally correct? We will know more as the case law comes to pass, but being consistent with your legal guidance is just so critical. And even as you return to the workplace, you're going to be having a lot of those accommodations come in, and it might be a medical accommodation, it might be a personal accommodation. Managing those is just so critical, and what you communicate and how you communicate is just going to be even more critical as we go forward. And of course, keeping certain things confidential and making sure your managers are trained on that as well is just really, really important. So remember that consistency piece, because equal is not always equal. It might be unequal in some people's eyes. So I always like consistency.
Makes sense. And we got one more question, and I know we've got two things that we definitely want to make sure there's time for: a wrap-up slide with some really good takeaways, and then I also want to share what we have as far as our next topic coming up. But one other question, and I think this is probably one that others have as well. We've seen a bunch of screenshots and things. Talk about what parts of ServiceNow this is. Do you need the HR module? I'm going to start the answer, but then I'll turn it over to both of you. There are certainly things you can do. If you have ServiceNow and do not have the HR module, there's a lot you can do, right? You can create service request forms, you can create automation and workflows, and there's a lot you can do to just kind of help the organization ask for things, and you know, they're going to be basically request items. However, a lot of, you know, what we're talking about here is pre-built over in the HR module and also part of the workplace apps. So I'm going to shift gears and turn this back over to both Molly and Carol. We know that clients that don't have the HR module can use ServiceNow to manage some workflows that touch on some of these things, but maybe you can elaborate on the major difference, right, by actually adopting the HR part of the platform itself.
Sure. Yeah, the HR platform, like I mentioned before, is a completely separate module, and it really allows for the risks and controls to ensure that HR professionals are really handling the HR-related requests, accommodation, any sort of sensitive information. And so that's why we always recommend handling these more sensitive employee items through ServiceNow HR in order to keep that separation between a standard IT request and a more sensitive HR request. Now today we also did share a number of screenshots from our Safe Workplace app, which is also another app that is available, and that app is once again separate from, and you can set certain permissions for the functionality within that app. And so we are able to really handle a lot of the sensitive specific COVID-related items through the Safe Workplace app, while at the same time really managing the risk as well. Carol, anything to add?
No. One thing in particular too is your employee service portal, which is something that you can absolutely use, is also a great way to leverage your ServiceNow experience, and utilizing campaigns that are a part of your employee service HR modules are just great ways to keep those communications up. And of course, you're now mobile.
Excellent. Okay. Kind of roll up the final considerations.
Yep. So how can your employee organization pivot from pandemic to the future workplace? Most critical is leverage the technology and the self-service capabilities that you already have. Really making sure you've got those portals and using your communication tools effectively and having that omni-channel experience. So every single thing that you should do, everything that you look at with regards to employees is making sure it's moments that matter. If you're making your employees hop through different systems 5 or 6 times and they're exhausted by the time that they finally get to what they want, that's not the great employee experience you want. So having that one source of truth, that one ability for your employees to go in and get the answer that they need, using real layman's terms. You know, one thing that we always say, well, the HR word is FEMLA, or the HR word is leave of absence. Well, your employees might just say, I need time off. So think about those terms that your regular employees use, your regular workforce uses, and using metadata to making sure you can search, your employees can search off of that. Molly, do you want to take number 2 for us?
Yes, and how do you really monitor that employee and leadership sentiment in order to proactively evolve in this new environment. And one of the most important things is gathering feedback in a variety of different ways. We've got pulse surveys, employee surveys, different ways to use forums to gather feedback, comments, and so on. And so there's a wide variety of tools just really out of the box for many of the modules that you have with ServiceNow, if you have ServiceNow, or the tools that you use every day within your organization. But utilizing and gathering ongoing feedback is really important because of this changing environment.
And then finally is, don't wait to develop your employees. Don't wait for that perfect time to develop them for the next role. Start now. Start small, finding mentors for your employees, finding ways that they can connect and be developed in every single thing that they do, whether it's new tasks, whether it is making sure that they've got the connections across the organization, making sure they understand the big picture. Develop them now before they think, well, you know what, this organization is kind of wooing me on the side to go to them. So also remembering that one size does not fit all. You might have lots of different sources that you can pull training and development from. You've got LinkedIn Learning, you've got your own employee portal, you've got life experiences of other individuals within the organization that can help feed that. So remember, we might be shifting from solving to evolving, but the next step really is continuing to develop those employees. So anything else, Molly, that I might have missed on those? Okay, great. John?
Well, excellent. Yeah, no, Carol, Molly, thanks so much for getting us that kind of tour and getting us thinking about both process and the platform and problems. I mean, that's really it. We've got new kinds of problems, but the good news is we're figuring it out and evolving. I think one of the slides up there, the key that hit me was the ability to be adaptive to these changes, and that's not going to change at all. Hey, for those folks, I just wanted to share, as promised, the next one we're doing end of September, top 5 features of the Rome release. So if you're on here and you're more in kind of the HR business side, make sure the folks that you know across the aisle that are focused on the technology side, would love to have them join us for that. And also, if you'd like to get a link to the recording to those other sessions that we've had all throughout the year, just ping us right here in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that you get those as well. So thanks so much for spending some time with us today, and look forward to the next session as well as others. And if you've got some topics you'd love to see us do, we're looking for October, November, and December. So please shoot us a note with things you'd be interested in learning more about. Thanks so much.